sharing. Our first speaker is Mickey Doan from UC Davis. So yeah, welcome and thanks for being here.
Okay, of course.
I think you're open, so let's go to this and open this, share screen. I think we're good there. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. All right. Hi, everyone. Do I have to say here? Okay. All right. I'll try to stay here then. Hi, I'm Mickey. I'm from UC Davis. And today I will present the livelihood strategies in the climate change vulnerable region. So this is joint work with Anubhav Gupta from Virginia Tech, Binoy Majumdar, our few manager, Alexander Michuda from Cornell, and then Heng Zhu from World Food Program. Since we have a small group, I would try to make it a much more casual conversational. So if you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand and we can talk through your questions. So the motivation is that climate change has changed the pattern of weather from increasing temperatures and reduction in rainfall, but also increased the occurrence and intensity of extreme weather such as coastal cyclones. And it's threatened livelihoods and displaced people all over the world. However, there's a disproportionate burden placed on the poor in developing countries. So based on this population adjusted map by the World Bank Group, we see that close to 60% of the world's population feels the impact, adverse impact of rising temperature, most likely concentrated in the global south with the maroon colors. So most of the poor rely on agriculture as their main source of income, but with climate change, that means that their soil is no longer productive. There's also less predictable rainfalls. That means that farmers also adapt to that reality and move out of agriculture. In development economics, we also have established that the poor lack resources to cope with adverse shocks. So access and also usage of credit and insurance market is very limited by the poor. So we think that it's important to understand the livelihood diversification of people living in these climate vulnerable areas. Our research objectives are twofold. The first question that we want to ask is, what are the livelihood diversification strategies of the poor due to climate change? And then the second, more methodological question is, can we use high frequency household data to provide more insights on livelihood diversification and coping strategies of people? So here's the outline of my talk. So I will start with the background and then talk through the climate shocks that happened in this region in the last 15 years. We'll go through the baseline and financial diary data that is unique to our study, discuss what is the contribution of our paper to the literature, how we use the observable patterns to discuss the livelihood strategies using both the baseline data as well as the high frequency data. And lastly, I will wrap up with the future research and discussions of our work. So the background, we focus on the Sundarbans region. It's spread over India and Bangladesh. This is the map of the Indian part of Sundarbans. So Sundarbans in Bengali is a word for beautiful forest, and it's also a very, very beautiful region of India. It's low-lying coastal delta region in the Bay of Bengal and is considered one of UNESCO World Heritage Sites. But livelihood strategies in the Sundarbans have been affected by coastal cyclones in the last decade with rising sea levels as well as high soil salinity. So we believe that the livelihood strategies in the Sundarbans just illustrative of a wider phenomenon of household coping mechanism to climate change in different regions of the world. So in some studies, it has been said that in the next few decades, this region will see the largest ever human exodus. The total population of this region is about 4.4 million, with estimate of 50% of them living below the poverty line. So that's the background that we will use to explore the livelihood strategies in this region. And we'll show the climate shock that happened since 2009. So we have categorized on the left-hand side some of the major hurricanes that the region have seen, from Isla starting in 2009 up until the most recent hurricane Asani in March 2022. So there's a time lapse that I will show of the changing pattern of islands. So we have several circles to show how the land has been changing. And if you focus on this lower left side of the circle, you will see that some patterns of, I don't know if it will show, let me see. Sorry, I'm not sure if I can show it in the screen. Okay, so if you notice, like some of these islands over here are slowly disappearing from starting in the early 2000s up to now. So this circle over here that used to be an island completely disappeared. And then some of the islands has also been eaten away by the sea level. So our data comes from Sundarbans, India, so the Indian part of Sundarbans. And we follow a multi-stage sampling. So out of 19 blocks, we randomly selected 5 admin blocks highlighted by the 5 circles. And then from each of the blocks, we randomly selected 2 villages, one closer to the coastal river and then one farther away. So we end up with 10 randomly selected villages. And then for each village, we have about 25 to 35 households, which leaves us with about 305 households in our sample. And our data comes in with 2 components. The first component is the baseline data that we collected in November 2018. And then the second component is the weekly financial data over the span of a full year, starting after our baseline up until October of 2019. So the baseline collects pretty basic information about the household, basic demographics, but also their main livelihood strategies, income sources such as agriculture, businesses, employment. And we started out wanting to explore more about migration and shock history. So we collected very detailed information about the hot shock history since 2009. Then for the weekly financial diary, we have weekly information over the span of a full year for this variables: income by gender, household borrowing and lending, remittances, consumption expenditure, as well as non-consumption expenditure. So as you can see, it's a very rich data set. It's weekly data over the span of a full year. So we have about 49 data points for each household. And if you ever keeping track of your financial records, you know that it's hard to get into the habit of keeping track it daily, weekly, or even monthly. So I just want to highlight how much of a challenge it is to actually get good data with our weekly financial data. We work with our field team really closely to encourage them to incentivize households to fill out a survey for their own benefit, but also for our benefit to use the data to inform policies. And we try different methods to make sure that we get good data by having our numerators as well as the team leaders' phone numbers on each of the few financial diaries, so that if they have any question, they can follow up with questions and get answer from us. But also we collect the data every month and give them the new financial diary for the next month. So we keeping track of the data very frequently. So we believe that our study has 2 potential contributions for 2 strands of literature. The first strand of literature is on livelihood diversification. So most livelihood studies rely on cross-sectional data. There's some work Malawi, Laos, and then a recent work by Sun and co-authors on rural China. Some do use panel data that carried out by Riordan in early 1997 in Africa and then Latin America later on in 2007. Zhao and his co-author also used panel data to study rural Cambodia. So that's one contribution to describe the livelihood strategies in a region that hasn't been mostly focused in the literature. And then the second contribution is to the literature on climate change, resilience, and adaptation. So there have been some cross-sectional data study as well as panel data studies. But we believe that cross-sectional and even panel data mask the seasonal variation. So with the use of high-frequency data, we can review some temporal coping strategies to natural shocks. And we contribute to the literature by using this high frequency weekly microdata and also using machine learning techniques to cluster household way of diversify their income. So here's a summary of our household demographics. We have 305 households. On average, a household head is about 50 years old with 5 years of education. So this is pretty on par with other regions of India. About 10% of our sample is female-headed household. Household size about 4 to 5 members with 1 child. We have about 65% of household with migrants and similar proportion for farming. We also have 12% of household with some sort of local businesses. So when we use baseline data to cluster their livelihood strategies, we follow the Cayman's clustering algorithm. And what we do is that we look at this indicator variable. So for the first 2 variables, it grouped by whether you are in local or outside employment. And then the last, all the following variables indicate which income strategy you follow. So for example, fishermen is an indicator of whether you have at least one member does fishing activity. There's NREGA, which is the National Rural Employment Guarantee Act work. There's also business, whether household owns and operates a small business, whether household receives remittances, and then whether household have at least 1 member as a migrant. And then lastly, whether household engages in farming activity. So these are the variables we use in our Cayman's algorithm. And using our method, we get at 6 optimal clusters, which I group into these 2 groups. So the first group, which are local work and farming, fishermen, and then local work and businesses. And then the second group has some migration focus. So migration farming, migration and local work, and then lastly, migration outside work. So we also create a livelihood diversity index to understand for each cluster, how do they diversify their income? So it's defined as the max of whether it's local employment or unemployment plus sum of all the other activities. So here's a breakdown of the diversity index. And as we can see, household diversify and engage in 4 to 5 income activities on average. And then the second column here is the fisherman group that seems less diversified. And then household with mainly migration and farming, which is the third column, have higher income diversification. So that's one way for us to cluster household livelihood strategies, but we also take advantage of our high frequency data to think about, can we cluster them using this time series clustering method? So we use a method called dynamic time warping that is created by computer scientists to think about when events occur at different rates or at different times, can we align the rates and timing and group them together? So as you can see from this graph, there's a light blue versus the dark blue color that represent 2 different villages. And then the pink column is the family cycle that happened during the calendar year in which we have the data for our financial weekly diaries. So you can see immediately that the blue lines behave very different from the blue line. So there's some variation within the year that we want to capture using the financial data. So here I would go into one specific variable that you can clearly see with our financial weekly data. So this is a net debt defined as outstanding net debt minus loan repayment. So using the method of dynamic time warping, it gives us 4 clusters. We name it 0, 1, 2, and 3. So as you can see, cluster 0, 2, and 3 have net debt spike at different times. So this is 0, 1, 2, and 3. And 0, 2, and 3 have the spikes, which is the red line, spikes at different times. So for January, for the cluster 0, you can see that it spiked in around January 10, which is around planting season. Then for cluster 2, it spiked around August and then October. So August is around the harvest season and then festival season. And then lastly, on cluster 3 with a lot more household, we have them spike actually around June up to August. The interesting thing is that we see the cluster 1, which is the top right, that they actually accumulate debt over the year. So they pay off, they actually lend out money because the 0 line is around here. So they lend out money at the beginning of the year and then accumulate debt over the second half of the year and then pay back at the end of the year. So before the festival. So our question is, if we would like to understand why cluster 1 is different from the other clusters, and it's important to investigate what drives membership into that specific cluster. So cluster classification analysis, we did a cluster classification analysis on the baseline household variable, and here is our regression analysis. Basically, what we find is that the relative probability of being in this net debt accumulation cluster increases if you are a household that receives remittances over the year, or you have members with long-term employment and regular payments. So there's more stable income from different diverse sources. So now I move to the discussion part. Households continue to diversify and adapt several coping mechanisms to face climate change. And short-term diversification coping strategy get masked in cross-sectional and panel data, because usually panel cross-sectional, of course, you only see once. For panel data, you only see a particular time of the year, and it could be another time in several years. So you don't see this happening within their strategies happen within the year. And high frequency data, therefore, more important for us to explore with recurrent climate shock. Of course, this is with the drawback that we only have 1 year of data to explore this variation within a year. Ideally, we would do this exercise again for a full year to see how different they are. Is it or whether that year is only a specific year that have this particular pattern. But we think that there's a lot of information we can get from high frequency data. For example, remittance receiving a long-term employment household do accumulate debts and pay off at a later stage. And this has policy implication for how we want to help them adjust to this ever-changing climate change for impact on this household. And then for future research, we are planning to explore more on machine learning and then combine with standard econometric tool to provide additional insights into their livelihood strategies. We also intend to combine data from several sources in future research, including the data that we already have and potentially extend to get more high frequency household survey from the same household. We also intend to get migrant surveys in destination to match back to the original household. We mostly sense data to get rich data on soil salinity and how that affects their farming decision. And lastly, soil health decision, not just salinity level, but also what is going on in the soil. Is it still beneficial for household to stay or remain in farming? And if you're interested to learn more about the data set and our work in the Sundarbans, we recently published a paper about the COVID-19 lockdown in this region. And it goes into details how we use the data to explore the impact of the lockdown on this 300 households. So thank you so much for listening, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
I guess I have one question and one comment. So the question is, I saw that you were using journal type of thing, a diary, financial diary. So my question is, my experience says in these regions, there are like all households and not everyone. So how did you bypass that scenario, or like is it like a self-selection where? And the comment is, are you only looking into like agriculture, like in terms of crops, or are you looking into like fisheries and other stuff? I don't know about India, but in Bangladesh, during the around the Sundarban regions, because of saline water, they started farming shrimps, which has in turn led to worse soil conditions for farming. So
yeah, thank you for your comment. It's actually one of the things that we struggle when we start out with the financial diaries, because we provide the physical copies of the diary to each household. What we end up working, there's of course quite a lot of ultra poor households in that region. But what we noticed, what was very encouraging for us, is that for those households who's had food illiterate, they actually let their children who were in school to participate in this exercise. And they were really happy to have that exercise to encourage the benefit of education, and then involving them in the financial activities and planning of the household. But in case if there's no one in the household who could do so, we actually work with local enumerators to help the household. And since they are from the same village, they were able to work through the financial numbers with the household. And then for your second comments, we do notice that there's a lot of fishery activities within the 300 household in Africa as well. We haven't really fully explored that angle. There's something that we also interested in thinking about, because it's not just farming, but this household also rely a lot on the natural environments around them. So collecting honey, going to collect fresh shrimps. So we would like to think a little bit more carefully of how to get the data and how that complements with their farming decisions.
thank you so much.
Yeah.
Can I ask a follow-up?
So they are my co-authors.
In terms of this shrimping and wildlife, when you say that the shrimping is less of worse soil conditions.
Yeah, this is not my area, but like I heard that's what's happening. So yeah, I was just wanting to like get an idea of what you guys are.
Because I was gonna ask you.
It's probably because of this.
Is it like the soil more saline?
Yeah, I think it's
Yeah,
probably
I think
because
that's
of
like so like since they're like I think shrimp farming requires some sort of salinity in the water. So like since they earn a lot more money using shrimps and exporting it, they tend to like veer towards farming shrimps rather than crops, and that has led to like other households around the area not able to farm because the soil salinity hasn't increased like so much. So
yeah, and it's a very high upfront fixed cost for them to get into the shrimp business.
That's actually a very good point that you are making. But the other thing is that these fisheries that have been started there are owned by large companies, and the marginal farmers would end up working there as also like as laborers, right? So they don't have ownership there, so they're just working as wage work labor. So the question for them, if you are not involved in farming, the question is, would you migrate to some other part of the country, or would you work locally and do fishing, right? So that kind of introduces interest in that.
Yes.
And it's something which we have.
Yeah.
No, but it's absolutely interesting research. Like, thank you so much for doing
Thank you so much for your question. Any other questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Were you have the capacity to ask any impact on the household?
So we do not have like a causal story to tell, but from our few teams, since we have been working with them like over the past like 3 years, they said that I don't know how much of that like stick with them, that they would carry out a practice of keeping their financial activities. But from the narratives that we got from a few teams, that it's really helped them to see like their income stream within the year, as well as how much they spend on different categories. And they were really they were excited to have their children to be part of this exercise and encouraging them to get higher education because of that. You wanted to add anything else?
No, that's one thing which you said. So when we were kind of wrapping up the field work with the financial diaries, the households told us that we wish we continued, because it was a good habit that of keeping the finances. But yeah, so often as researchers we struggle with kind of data collection and household compliance. So and we were worried about that when we started this in 2018. We actually did a pilot in 2016 with a smaller set of households. But when we started in 2018, we were worried about households continuing for a year. But we were surprised that, at the time when we were wrapping up households, that it's a good practice that you have got us involved in, and we would like to continue, but we could continue, but something that we want to explore. And, from a research point of view, one of the objectives of this research is also encouraging other researchers to kind of carry out this high frequency surveys wherever it's possible to kind of get into the nuances of the seasonalities we may hear get from.
And like also like in pursuing further on this paper and project, we are planning to discuss just like the challenges and the way that we approach collecting this kind of data, like high frequency data for household, and how to retain their interest for the project.
Like I said, the high frequency but we're able to identify patterns that change throughout the year to make quality interested in regard
Yeah, so we actually are, so when we were looking at the data, that of course like the Z pattern, we also see another pattern with like female income when we use the high frequency data. And so there are a lot of things in there that kind of hidden from us, like the mechanism we do not really fully understand. So we actually just finished wrapping up a qualitative study in the field to ask exactly all this question of like when, like how the household decided to migrate, like what factors that like go into your decision making when you make that choice. Who do you take out a loan from? What is like the cycle of debt looks like in your family and things like that. So we planning to incorporate that into maybe some version of this paper to be able to say more concretely of what is the policy recommendation we would have for different types of livelihood strategies of household. Yeah, but for now it's still in progress, and we're excited to continue pursuing all these different angles. Thank you so much.
You had your clicker. But you took it out. Yeah, thanks. Okay, I think I got it switched over successfully. The next speaker is Mon Lee from Utah State University. So welcome, thanks.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming. Here, I'm going to present my research article entitled Ex ante and ex post adaptations to weather fluctuations, evidence from Bangladesh agriculture. I welcome questions. Please feel free to interrupt me if you have any questions, or you can hold up question till the end. Before I start, I'd like to quickly summarize the major findings of this study. I found farmers can adapt when temperatures are below 32 degrees Celsius, but increased exposure of crops to extreme heat, like temperatures above 32 degrees Celsius, cause significant decline in agricultural productivity. Bangladeshi farmer reduce rice cultivation and adopt non-rice improved seed varieties against expected high temperatures. They also reallocate irrigation water between rice and non-rice crops and trade off expenditure in irrigation for urea application against unexpected high temperatures. But the total cash cost associated with cultivation does not respond to weather changes, possibly because of binding financial liquidity constraint. Rising temperatures and changing precipitation pattern contempt billion to hunger across the developing world, casting a gloom over the prospect of poverty alleviation among subsistence farming households. The adverse effect of global climate change on agriculture has been broadly examined in the climate economy literature. More recently, there is a growing body of research focusing on farmers' adaptive responses in the United States and several developing countries. But the literature on adaptation mechanisms has paid less attention to the distinction between adaptations to expected weather and adjustment to unexpected shocks, and is seen with respect to South Asia, the most densely populated region where the rural livelihoods are heavily reliant on agriculture and are extremely vulnerable to climate change. This study attempts to fill this research gap by examining the effect of weather changes on agricultural productivity in Bangladesh and investigating the resulting smallholder farmers ex ante and ex post responses to those changes. To this end, I combined 3 waves of Bangladesh integrated household survey with long-term weather data for analysis. The survey collects detailed information about plot-level agriculture production and practices. The baseline survey consists about 5,500 nationally representative rural households, excluding all off-farm households, and the households appeared in only one survey wave, reduced the sample size to 2,743 households. This is the effective sample used for empirical analysis. Whether construction of the weather variables is an empirical question, depending on the study subject, study area, and data availability. This study used precipitation of 4 selected months to capture the tropical monsoon type climate in this country, and used green degree dates to measure the temperature effect on agriculture. So here, the monthly precipitation was extracted from charts with a spatial resolution of 3 arcmin. Daily temperature, which are necessary for the calculation of green degree dates, are not available at a high resolution. So here, I constructed a proxy for daily temperature by temporarily interpolating the fine resolution monthly temperature data from WaterClim with the coarse resolution daily temperature from AAEA 5. And the green degree dates is calculated with a base temperature of 10 degrees Celsius. The ceiling temperature is tested and specified in the range of 28 degrees Celsius and 33 degrees Celsius, commonly suggested in the literature. I also calculate the harmful degree days by summing the degrees above the ceiling temperature. Next, I'm going to briefly describe the conceptual framework. Consider a hypothetical price-taking farmer produce a composite of agricultural goods with 2 broad types of inputs. A causally fixed input denoted as XF and a variable input denoted as XV. The farmer is unable to adjust the level of causally fixed inputs against the unexpected changes during the growing season. Seeds, for example, are considered a causally fixed input. The type and the quantity of the seeds cannot be altered being one sown. Fertilizer application and the labor, in contrast, are variable inputs. Their levels can be changed anytime during the growing season. Irrigation is a special case. It possesses the property of both causally fixed input and a variable input. Installation of irrigation facility is a causally fixed input, but irrigation water usage is a fixed input. Is a variable input. Simplifying the assumptions about non-weather exogenous factors such as input and output price, the conceptual framework focuses on weather effect on agricultural input, on agricultural inputs and output. The farmer choose production inputs in a recursive 2-stage decision-making process. Firstly, the causally fixed input is chosen at the beginning of a growing period. And then based on farmers' perception of weather history, here I'm going to use WE to represent the weather history. Then the variable input is chosen based on the selected causally fixed input and the current weather. The current weather is denoted as W here. The causal effect of expected weather on causally fixed input is directly identified, provided that there are no unmeasured confounding factors. The causal effect of current weather on variable inputs is confounded by 2 non-causal passes through expected weather. So these are 2 non-causal passes, the first one, and the second one is through U. But conditional on the expected weather can block these 2 non-causal passes and then subsequently identify the causal effect of current weather on variable inputs. So Yeah, so this is shown in the directed acyclic graph decks. Once the two types of inputs are chosen, the production cost is determined, and the production profit depends jointly on these inputs and the current weather. So as shown in the deck on the right-hand side of the figure. Okay. This study used a fixed effect strategy to identify the weather effects on agricultural productivity and various adaptation activities in both dry season and wet seasons. The dry seasons corresponds to winter season, roughly from November to April. And the wet season includes both pre-Kharif and Kharif seasons, roughly from April to October. Among adaptation activities of particular interest are crop allocation, the adoption of improved season varieties, irrigation, and input composition. So here, the basic regression specifications are given in these two equations. So here, the XIT represents the level of cause-fixed input related to seeds of household I at temperature T. These inputs are determined only by expected weather. The term YIT represents multiple outcome variables, including per acre production profit, per acre production cost, and a set of other input variables. These outcome variables are determined by both current weather and expected weather. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. Oh yes, I'm going to skip this one. This table presents the estimation results for the profit equation in dry seasons and wet seasons. For each season, the first column, the column 1 and column 4, for each season, the first column reports the estimated unconditional weather effects that exclude any expected weather variables. The second column corresponds reports the estimated weather effects conditional on expected weather, measured by the moving average of weather variables over the past 5 years prior to the survey year. Under the third column, column 3 and column 6, the third column as the weather coefficient of variations to measure the expected interannual volatility. So the estimated weather effect are robust to the choice of the GDD ceiling temperature in dry seasons, but are sensitive to the choice in wet seasons, where the exposure of crops to high temperatures below 32 degrees Celsius are insignificant, but the exposure to temperatures above 32 degrees Celsius are significant, like negative. For example, as shown in column 4, exposure of crops to 1 degree day of extreme heat above 33 degrees Celsius reduce agricultural productivity by 4,857 taka per acre, translated into about 30% of the mean profit. The conditional estimates reported in column 5 and 6 produce slightly less negative point estimates. In contrast to wet season, there is a suggestive evidence that mild temperatures measured by ground degree days have a positive and a much smaller effect on agricultural productivity. This result highlights the nonlinear, non-monotonic relationship between temperature and agricultural productivity, and is consistent with the Burke and America's study on corn productivity in the United States. In other words, damage from exposure to extreme heat could be much higher than the benefit from exposure to mild temperatures, all else being equal. Although there's no evidence on the negative effect on agricultural productivity of exposure of crops to temperature between 28 degrees Celsius and 32 degrees Celsius, it doesn't mean that farmers have not taken any actions to adapt to that exposure. This table, as shown in this table, the share of cultivated area of rice decline with expected harmful degree days with a much lower threshold temperature in both seasons. And the heat response in wet seasons is much lower than the heat response in dry seasons, possibly because of the heavy rainfall in monsoon season. When about 50% of land remains inundated in the country, which leaves farm with much fewer options except planting the waterlogging tolerant crops such as rice paddy. Okay. With the same specification, this table reports the results from the estimation of the equation of the share of improved seed varieties of non-rice crops in dry season and wet season. We find the share increase with expected heat about 28 degrees Celsius. And the share also increased with July precipitation visual measure of flooding, the risk of flooding in wet seasons. In addition, there is no evidence that the effect of unexpected weather shocks on either the share of rice cultivated area or the share of non-rice or the share of crop specific improved seed variety area. So those are related to seeds. So these results reinforce the hypothesis that farmers are unable to adjust seed input against the expected high temperatures. Okay, next. Irrigation. Irrigation is one of the most critical factors of agricultural production in this country. It enables farmers to grow one more season of rice and wheat crop in dry winters. Most farmers have access to irrigation facilities, and the groundwater is the major source of irrigation. This table reports the share of irrigated area of rice and non-rice crops, conditional on expected weather. And let me see. Of particular interest is on dry season, not wet season. And we find the share of non-rice irrigated area expectedly increase with harmful degree days and decline with precipitation in October. And the share of irrigated rice area deserves attention. We find that the share decline with harmful degree days. This seemingly counterintuitive finding is possibly because Bangladesh farmer tends to reduce rice cultivated area to adapt to high temperatures. Understandably, in expectation of excessive heat, a better strategy could be switching from water-intensive crops, such as rice, to drought-tolerant crops, then increasing irrigation water usage. Finally, I explored the trade-offs among various inputs in constructing cash cost associated with cultivation. Here, I focus on annual analysis instead of seasonal analysis in order to provide a comprehensive picture on the trade-offs. All point estimates of the point estimates of all weather variables in the cost equation are statistically insignificant, possibly because of the binding financial constraint on smallholder farmers. As for the input composition, I find the cost share of urea application increase with harmful degree days. As suggested in the agronomic literature, the high temperatures cause high rate of ammonia volatilization. Therefore, farmer may increase urea application to offset nitrogen loss. In addition, binding financial liquidity constraint induce trade-offs among various inputs. For example, as farmers spend more on urea application, they spend less on other inputs. Okay. In addition to the identification activity discussed above, I probed the robustness of the estimated weather effects in several other ways. The robustness check include students' t-test for sample attrition, marrying the expected weather with a 4-year time interval, clustering the standard error at the district level to allow the error terms are correlated at a larger scale. So the previous tables reports the estimates clustered at the village level, the PSU, the primary sampling unit level. I also analyze the heterogeneity in weather by wells. So overall, I found little evidence that undermine the major conclusion of this study. The above analysis indicates that Bangladesh farmers are resilient to exposure of crops to temperatures between 28 degrees Celsius and 32 degrees Celsius. The question is to what extent through various adaptation activities, the question is to what extent those adaptive activities help mitigate the adverse effect of expected and unexpected weather. So overall, the effects of unexpected precipitation fluctuation on agricultural productivity are negligible. It may either because the weather effects have been offset by farmers' responses, or because there is no adjustment needed. In expectation of high temperatures in dry seasons, Bangladesh farmer reduce rice cultivated area to conserve more inputs to be applied to non-rice crops. And the suggestive evidence of the positive effect of growing degree days confirms the effectiveness of this measure. In contrast, in wet seasons, farmers have much fewer options of adaptation to expected high temperatures. The effect of unexpected high temperatures on agricultural productivity is worth discussing. When the daily mean temperature is below 32 degrees Celsius, the effect can be completely offset by trading off expenditures in irrigation for urea application in both seasons. But when daily average temperature is above 33 degrees Celsius in wet seasons, the effect is large, negative, and highly significant. In the presence of possible financial liquidity constraint, the total production cost does not respond to the temperature change. Discussion. The development of new heat-tolerant varieties that are especially suitable for wet season could be a strategy adapted to high temperature because the current variety are not tolerant to heat. In addition, seasonal reallocation of crop cultivation is another strategy against the wet season undesirable weather. In my another recent study, I found a cultivated area of kharif crop, so which is the wet season crop, can be reduced significantly without impairing farm income and social equity in this country. Finally, improved seasonal weather forecasts may also help farmers build resilience to high temperatures. Okay, thank you.
So the measure of expected better is it based on the inputs of the farmers or like just a rate?
You mean the measure of the
Measure for expected EPs or whatever we use in construction is it based on farmers' belief about what's going to happen in the future, or is it just based on weather data that's available?
Yeah, based on weather data. So I use the 5-year moving average of the past weather as a measure of expected weather.
So you're assuming that people have perfect foresight about how the weather is going to look.
Sorry, say it again.
So you're assuming that the farmers are correct about predicting the weather in the future.
Oh, no. So I think the farmer, as I said, the farmer make decision in a recursive two-stage decision-making process. First, farmer decides which crop or which variety will be planted based on their perception of past weather. And then, because of the current, there must be some deviation between the weather perception and the current weather, right? And here I call the weather shocks. And then if farmer observe there are some weather shocks, they can adjust variable inputs like fertilizer, like labor or irrigation water or pesticide. Farmer can adjust that to against the unexpected weather shocks. So basically, I just decompose the current weather into two parts. One is the expected weather. That's the moving average of a variable of a weather variable over the past 5 years. And the other is just the deviation between that expected weather and the current weather.
Okay, thanks for this question.
So in anticipation of, say, increases in temperatures, you're saying seasonal or farmers are making seasonal reallocations.
Yeah.
Do you know anything about the context in which you're provided with that information? Like, is this, are they acting on climate information services that are more formal, or is it more traditional knowledge that they are using to make those kinds of seasonal forecasts that allow them to change their patterns? Do you know more about the context?
Yeah, so yeah, in my paper, I do discuss the context. If I remember correctly, I think they combine both formal and informal information about the weather forecast, but the major source could be informal, not formal. Yeah, so.
Do you know anything about?
Sorry?
Do you know anything about salinity?
So you mean the soil, right?
If you have too much salt in the irrigation water, they have to apply irrigation water.
Yeah.
It might cause crops to be salt.
Yeah.
That limits the capacity of irrigation, applying irrigation water to that.
Maybe.
And that also raises the previous question, right? If you have too much salt in soil and water, maybe you're switching to agriculture.
That's a good point, but I assume the salinity level in soil would remain relatively constant over time, right? Am I right? But change by season?
I mean, one way to do this is to separate between coastal areas where salinity salt intrusion is really a problem versus inland areas where it's already happening.
Yeah,
See
maybe.
if there's anything.
But it also depends on the precipitation. If you have precipitation, that influence some of the salinity from the soil. So it's really complex. I think, for the Kharif season, which is the rainy season of paddy cultivation, I think you can see some variations across the rainy season versus the wet season.
Yeah.
Because the problem with salinity, I think, is more pronounced in the wet season when you don't have the precipitation. But it's really complex. That's a very good point.
I think maybe, so because, I control the household level fixed effect, I think that can partially capture that. But maybe an additional robot check by conduct the analysis by 2 different regions and to see if there is any potential heterogeneity on the weather effects across region. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, that's a very good point.
I really, thank you for the presentation. I really liked your conceptual framework where you talked about the quasi-fixed inputs and the variable inputs and how it affects that. So the quasi-fixed inputs in this case would be land, or the land, how should we think about that variable?
I would say land is fixed input. So I do, in fact, when I process the data, so generally the land ownership remain unchanged over the study period. And I also exclude only 21 households that changed land ownership, for example, buy land or sell land since 2006. So then I assume the effects of land captured by household fixed effect. I'm assuming it's a long-term effect.
Yeah, I was thinking, when you said quasi-fixed, and I was thinking of land leasing and land renting out by households. If that is, if you have information on that.
Yeah. I see your point. That's so this is a complete story. That's some limitation I discussed in the discussion in my initial draft. And because I didn't consider the other like off-farm activities, but one of the reviewers say I should do more about the attrition test. So therefore, I think I do this one, including. So I think somehow it will not affect the major conclusion because so see this the second attrition test is kind of I estimate the likelihood of off-farm probability and then but there's no and then I have the inverse Mills ratio and then I use the add the inverse Mills ratio estimated from the probability equation to the main equation, and there is no statistically significant. So yeah, but again, the focus here is on farmers' production activity. Yeah. But
one other clarificatory question. So when you say allocation of land to rice, or you were talking about rice, are you just talking about traditional rice or any high-yield variety rice or soil salinity resistant variety rice that are there? Is it all together?
Yeah, I think yeah, for the improved seed varieties, I aggregate them together. So there are so many types, it's difficult.
But does that include rice variety?
Yeah, no, that's the improved variety. I didn't report it because there's not significant. So therefore, I only report the improved seed varieties of non-rice crops here in this presentation, but it's included in my paper. Thank you. Any other question?
I'm just wondering that you can use the same model to predict farmers' adaptation of irrigation technology or not based on the past experiences about.
Yes, I think we can because there are in the survey there are some different irrigation methods. Yeah, yes, we can. Yeah.
Do you have any data on gender? I think that whether adaptation is different
Yeah, I think, yes, a lot of questions. Yes, I think you can use, but keep in mind, so here, this analysis is conducted at the household level. The only way to include gender is just the household head by gender, right? But I think ideally we should conduct the individual level analysis. Then we can definitely to see if there is any gender difference or any effects on women's empowerment. Yeah, we can. Yes, yeah, the data allows.
Going back to that point, I think, and I'm no expert in Bangladeshi rice cultivation, but my understanding is that rice is that the family crop that's grown together and everyone participates. So you could do the heterogeneity analysis by looking at male and female headed households, but I don't think you can think about rice as being an individual crop that women could grow separately than men. So it's more like a household crop.
And I think men is the major labor. Yeah, women may play a role in during harvest season to harvest the crops, but it's not a major role. Yeah.
There's no households where there's no men, like, there's no households where women are the farmer differences because the men migrate to the city to work, and so it's women to maybe taking the decisions because, you know, people have left them to do the work.
Yeah, that's very
Like, we
interesting.
see that a lot, actually.
If I may, just I don't have an idea about the research of rice, but I can talk about context as I'm from Bangladesh. So what happens is when the household is a man and he migrates to the city, the family usually rents out the land to someone who can cultivate it. The female doesn't usually take over the land for cultivations.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay. I don't think so. Thank you.
The third one was Liz University. Yeah. Thanks for coming. Yeah, thank you too. Good job. Yeah, thanks.